My philosophy on retention is it will either happen to you or you will happen to it. I don't think enough companies realize what taking care of one or a handful of employees that might not be doing what they need to do to move the company forward, you've now alienated the whole. When you have turnover, that's where every time there's a turnover, there is a gap where there might not be anybody in that role. Once you find somebody, it's months to, who knows how long to actually have them up and running. It's pretty easy to put a cost on that. And that's not even including things like recruiting fees. When you do the right things and treat people well, it actually also comes back in the terms of ROI. It's a pretty cool thing in the business world.
How do you put people first when you are responsible for the bottom line? My guest today is Ryan Martin, CFO and senior executive with a deep understanding of how financial health and people strategy are more connected than most leaders realize. With experience across high-stakes sectors and leadership roles that demanded both fiscal discipline and human insight, Ryan brings a grounded, honest perspective to what it really takes to build a workplace where people want to stay. In this episode, we dive into the tension many in C-suite face, how to quantify the value of workplace well-being, how to support your managers without bloating budgets, and why retaining great people is ultimately tied to how we train them, especially during uncertain times. This is a conversation for decision makers who want more than just metrics. They want a lasting culture. So let's get into it. Ryan, thank you for being here today.
Absolutely.
I want to start here. I had a guest here, Sid Deutsch, and he talked about he doesn't buy companies until he understands that the founders have equitized the company, meaning they've shared ownership with the rest of the employees. Because one of the things that he sees is they will come buy companies, and then he would see that the founders haven't equitized, they haven't shared anything, and which will create so much grief within the company because normally the founders would know like months ahead and they would just let the rest of the teams know, hey, we've sold the company. Yeah. Yay, we've exited $1 billion, but no one is getting anything except us and our investors. How do you feel about that as a CFO, and how often do you see that?
So that's actually extremely common. How do I feel about not being equitized?
Yes.
That's the most common thing I see. I've got a background in M&A before my most recent CFO role. And there are times where you almost have to have like CIA level operations to figure out who the company is and what they do. And you know what I mean? Because you're absolutely right that most of the time in an M&A transaction, nobody knows, sometimes not even the controller. And the controller is generally the one that is giving you all the financial stuff. Sometimes there's a CFO in place, sometimes not. And that's where it's a really interesting back and forth of how do you figure out who a company is without actually being able to walk in and talk to people and all that. And you're absolutely right, because then that leads straight into problem number 2 or 5 or 15, whatever you want to call it, where you now have to integrate these companies post-transaction. So you've got this company, nobody knew they were being bought.
Right.
Sometimes they are able to tell them, a few days early, a week or 2 early. Sometimes it's like, hey, we're going to have visitors this morning. And then a bunch of people in suits walk in and they're like, we bought your company. We're the owners now.
It's like a takeover.
In a matter of speaking, it actually is. And that's where it's so important to, get things right on the front end and then make sure that integration post-transaction is able to kind of run smoothly because you had the right conversations and the right visibility and everything kind of leading up to that.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there like, a fear of sharing too much when it comes to things like that? Because I know, guests that I've had here that I've actually like exited or have raised money. Normally when it comes to sharing information or communicating there's a fear of something happening. And sometimes this could be on the person actually buying the company. They want to control
Yep.
pretty much everything that goes out before the announcement happened. And then, I did talk to this guest, Seth, where he shared that there's so much grief that happens within that point.
Yeah.
And I want to understand just the correlation between the fear on the, like the owners, the C-suite, and then also the grief that happens on the people.
Yeah.
Meaning the management teams, the employers.
Yeah.
Employees. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Grief is a great word for it, honestly, because in many cases, these are, companies that are led by the founder up to the point of sale. So they're, in some cases, they've got people that have been there 5, 10, 15 plus years kind of building it with them. And so that's where it's extra difficult because they kind of feel like an owner, but in cases where they're either not an ESOP or they don't have some sort of, stock program, they're just not. So they feel, for all intents and purposes, running the business on the daily, all that, they feel like a stakeholder and an owner, but then they're not. And it's kind of all has to be done behind the scenes. The biggest reason why I feel it's difficult to be too visible with a transaction before it's kind of official is just the valuation. Mm-hmm. Because, and there's a lot of things in business that I try to work my head around and figure out how can we improve this, even though knowing that there's not a perfect solution. Because here's a quick example of something that does happen. So let's say you've got a key employee. They're not an owner. They are not technically required or invited to a lot of the talks about acquisition or anything like that. Well, if you start bringing them in a month or two before all the paperwork is filed and signed, what could happen, and what is a huge fear, legitimate fear from the seller, is that they go rogue. They start rallying people, hey, this is coming down the pipeline and it's not going to be good for us, whether it is or isn't. That could be the messaging. And that's where it's tough, because if you're trying to get papers signed at a certain valuation and then you have 2 or 3 key employees that are either causing disruptions or just flat out walk, that is not great for the valuation. So that's where it's also this dance of how do you treat people fairly and with integrity and with respect for their families and their future, but also understanding that in the world of M&A and transactions, there's a lot of things that you just can't unfortunately do. Yeah. So it's a tough thing. Yeah. And that's actually one of the things that I am very focused on is how do, myself now with Iconoclast Advisors, how do I, and my business partner, Katie, how do we move forward with these issues that we can't completely solve because they're just inherently there, but how can we treat people with dignity and respect along the way? Even in the scenario where there are a lot of efficiencies and you do have to let people go, how do you do that not only compassionately, but with a really forward-facing look at that individual's future?
Wow. And so how do you, and when I say how do you, meaning as C-suite, how do they make sure that, that 1 or 2, employee that's, it seems like they're part of the acquisition at that point. How do you make sure that they're taken care of throughout the whole process, especially when there is no communication happening and, there may be a chance of them finding out maybe 2 days before the acquisition or whether the acquisition already happened. How do you make sure that they can accept that, which I know equity plays a big part, but is there anything else that could help?
So I think probably a seat at the table, at least metaphorically. You can't afford to give every employee in a company a seat at the actual table. It just doesn't work. There's not enough seats. But if you can make someone feel like they have been a truly valuable piece of why the company got to this point, why it's valued the way it is, they might not be financially gaining on the actual sale through equity, but coming in, and this is now more on the buyer, coming in with an attitude of respect for what they've built and respect for their knowledge base. And so, every role that I've come into, so now I'm kind of on the outside looking in as a consultant, but every high level either CFO or other executive role I've had, I almost treat it like coming in the door as after an acquisition. Because when you have a new C-suite leader come in, it kind of feels like that. It kind of feels like a takeover, like, different leadership, different ways of doing things, different mindsets, different protections for different people or ways of doing things. And so I kind of come in and just listen. It's so amazing what you can do when you just set up meetings with everybody, and do it in a way. But when I say that, I think I kind of blame LinkedIn tongue in cheek. But there's a lot of like buzzwords, there's a lot of like you could snip this and go, oh man, it's amazing. You come in with whatever into a new company and, you meet with everybody. It looks good. You can put it on social media. Hey, look at me. I'm doing all this stuff. That's fine and dandy. But for me, it's so much more than just meeting with them. It's actually, can we curse on this podcast?
Oh yeah.
All right. It's actually giving a shit.
Yeah.
Actually taking what they say and what they've helped build to heart, and making sure that you're not just coming in thinking that you have all the answers and you know it all. Because I can tell you, you might have bought a similar company 10 or 20 times. You're going to learn new stuff every single time. It could be 100 times. Right. And there are so many ways to kind of uncover that. And if you're just superficially meeting with people, if you're just looking at people's backgrounds and going, well, this person went to, a good school and they, moved up and been in the industry a long time. If that's what you're focused on, that's going to be a rude awakening.
Right.
So yeah, I think more than anything, it's just whatever you do, just doing it genuinely,
right,
and doing it with a true eye towards, let's get to know these people, get to know what they've been through getting the company here and how can we move forward, really making them understand that they are a true business partner.
Right. So let's say as a C-suite leader coming in, do you have those one-on-ones with the entire management teams and then also employees as well? Is there like some boundary somewhere where, you should stop at?
100%. Yeah. So, and this also kind of goes to like, how big is the company? What's the mindset? How vertical versus horizontal is the org chart and all that. I think that you have to know who you're dealing with. When you talk about managers and leaders, you have to first get a very clean grasp on who they are, how they got to where they are, what their background is along the way, and really make sure that you understand how they need to be, I don't want to say handled because I think that's not the right term here, but how they need to be kind of led themselves, and there are plenty of managers. And by the way, this actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, it could actually be a great tell of like who is next level material.
Right. The
managers that are open and that they go, oh my gosh, I'm so excited you're here. I can't wait to, learn with you and kind of go through this process together. Those are the people that you can sit down with their direct reports and have a clear understanding of, you're not there to get dirt on that manager. You're not there to figure out, okay, what is this manager doing wrong and how can I, fix it and settle their hash and all that stuff. What you're really doing is creating a comfort and visibility where that's when you learn what's really going on and what's really, both what is really invaluable to driving the company forward through whatever process you're in, but also kind of where the sticky spots are. It's one of those things where every company I've ever been in, there's things that everybody talks about from a non-managerial point of view. And you can walk into a company and the managers and leaders might not even be aware of it, but there's going to be issues, and some of them might be petty. Some of them might actually be pretty influential, and they're just commonly known. And management and leadership either hasn't taken the time to really dig into them, or they haven't taken the time to develop those relationships to where they can dig into them and learn about them.
Right.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah. And I'm going to step back a little bit because I want to, like define what the role of a CFO is, because we're talking about, ROI here. So it sounds like in just different ways that companies see working with their people. And what I want to do is to basically understand the role of a CFO in a company, either medium size, large size. It sounds like you've worked with different companies in those levels, but then also how do they play culturally within the company?
So that's a really interesting and possibly loaded question, but the best questions usually are. So take it. So first of all, the role of a CFO is different than almost anybody outside the finance community would think of it. I always relay it to my own career. So I consider myself extremely blessed and fortunate to have gotten to where I got to in my career. Right. The reason I say that is I was good along the way. I was a good staff accountant, good controller. I think I was a pretty decent public accountant, obviously kind of getting me to that point. But then I became CFO and it was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know this was what I was always leading towards, because I humbly consider myself a very, very good CFO. And what I realized in hindsight is it was all about the strategic thinking and the building a plan and then making sure that you can support those around you to move the plan forward. That's really the role of a CFO. You're not going in there on a day-to-day basis making journal entries unless something's gone terribly wrong. Right. And you're not kind of handling those day-to-day responsibilities in the finance department. And a lot of people don't realize it because there's the word finance in the title, but CFOs are generally over all admin departments. So IT and project management and credit and a bunch of different things. So that's one of the things where there is a massive difference just in the high level thinking, the high level strategy versus actually moving the day-to-day tasks forward. One of my favorite things to do was I would get questions from the CEO, the board, or honestly just anybody, and they'd go, hey, where are we on getting payables reconciled for the month or whatever it was. And I think a lot of CFOs would probably feel guilty if they didn't know the answer to that. I would actually wear it as a badge of honor. Like I would be like, listen, I will check, give me 5 minutes. Let me shoot a note, because that's something that I have completely entrusted to the team to not only allow me to do what I need to do in my role, but to just, give people a chance to fly and to really do it their own way. And, sometimes it's not how I would do everything. Sometimes it is, but at the end of the day, they own that process and I get to kind of, do what actually matters in my role and let them do what actually matters in their role.
Right.
Yeah.
So like, how do you guys, when I say guys, I mean CFOs, how do you see like retention within companies? Because you touched on the cultural aspect, which is like trusting your people and then letting them do what they do best. And then you just reach out to them when you need something so you can focus on what you do, which is a great culture to have, especially on the finance side of the company. Usually people don't really understand what's happening. But like, how do you guys see your role when it comes to retaining your people?
So it's an interesting question. Actually, I'll kind of expand on your last question a tiny bit with not just how I kind of described how CFOs relate in their role with the departments that they oversee and finance. The next level of that is strategic thinking with the rest of the leadership team. And that's something that I don't think gets really focused on enough and talked about enough, because that's where it's tough. Because in my opinion, there is a massive role for a true high-level strategic thinking CFO to be involved in things like retention and tenure and making sure that we're doing the right things to drive that. But not a lot of companies really feel comfortable putting their heads together as a C-suite and kind of creating pathways together and moving forward together. There's a lot of siloed thinking and a lot of just, this is how we've always done it. This is how we're moving forward. And it might not be the right way. Because ultimately my philosophy on retention is it will either happen to you or you will happen to it, honestly. So, there are times where you don't always want to retain everybody for a number of reasons, and I always like to preface statements like that with, I consider myself a very respectful person who carries myself with a lot of integrity and care for those around me. And so anything that we do as a leadership team, we do, with compassion and with an eye towards that person's future. But ultimately that has to be done. You have to make sure the right people are under the umbrella of the company and that they're in the right spots and doing the right things to move it forward. So that's where I think you can strategically happen to retention. The way retention happens to you, or the lack of retention, rather, is by seeing things like tenure versus talent and seeing I'll say favoring the few over the whole, if that makes sense. So, you might have a lot of one-off situations where someone is just not doing what they need to do, but, they're part of the family, quote unquote, which is another term I'm not in love with in the business sense. But I don't think enough companies realize what taking care of one or a handful of employees that might not be doing what they need to do to move the company forward. You've now alienated the whole. You've now held them down. If it's, a company that does share equity with a lot more people, whether it's a full ESOP or not, you're hurting the future and the valuation and all that of those individuals. And I think it's, it creates a really tough situation, because what I just described, there's a way to spin that. And I've heard it spun many, many times, where not only is that not the wrong thing to focus on, but it's actually what makes them great. Because, look, we've, our tenure is this many years, and we've got, people that have had some level of struggle in their role and their, life cycle with the company, whatever. And look how we've supported them, and they almost wear that as a badge of honor. And there's a time and a place for it. And there are situations where you do need to be way more lenient with people. But when you can actually focus on the collective whole and the collective, company as a group of employees, and move that forward in a way that actually moves the needle and makes sense, that's where the magic happens. And that's where, it all just comes down to what do you want to focus on to drive growth forward.
Right. And is there like a scenario where, companies are like putting too much emphasis on the tenure employees, but they could be actual bad for the culture, but they're really good at what they do, so they just keep keeping them, at the expense of pretty much everyone else who is bringing up that problem. Because I've had, I've worked with companies that I see that playing out, and I can tell that they're just okay with that at the expense of high turnover. But making sure they keep that one individual who's bringing in a lot of money, but they're corroding the culture. How do you see that play out? And I guess how often do you see that happen as a CFO? So it happens a lot, actually. And I will say, like, this stuff is not easy. That's why, as I talk through this, I always like to almost remind myself that, like, I have put in a lot of work and just had a lot of experience to kind of refine my mindset. And, I don't, I don't feel like these companies and leadership teams that are moving forward with that type of philosophy are, bad people, bad leaders, whatever. It's a flaw that is hard to get around. And that one is especially hard to get around, because what I'm
the example I'm kind of going through in my head as you're saying that is essentially the rainmaker model, where someone, whether they're an actual salesperson or just, getting a lot of stuff done in whatever department they're in, it's that model of, well, we can't afford to lose that person.
Right.
We can't afford to lose that revenue or that client base or whatever. And there's not enough focus on, sometimes in business, you have to take a step back to take multiple steps forward. You have to be willing to make an unpopular decision, sometimes lose a customer that you don't want to lose, but it just worked out that way. Sometimes you lose another employee or two because it's a decision that might not be seen as popular, or maybe they're in a similar spot where, they just don't feel great about it. And that's where you have to be willing to truly move forward and trust the long-term direction of the company.
Right.
Because as a leadership team, like, we're in charge of putting together this high level view of, here's where we want to be. Here's the roadmap for, next year, 3, 5 plus, whatever. And that's what you need to be focused on, because, depending on your ownership structure, and especially if there's like, PE interest involved or different things like that, they're not going to love having a couple down months or down 6 months or whatever. And we do everything to avoid it. But, it might be unpopular. I don't care if we have a bad month. I care if we hit our long-term goals, and we drive that long-term value to where now we're not only creating a culture that people want to continue to be a part of, but we're bringing in new individuals that see what we're doing from afar, and they're like, man, that is super cool. Like, to be able to go somewhere and be respected for what you do, be held to a standard of work and progress and momentum, but really just be a part of moving something forward in a meaningful way.
Interesting. So I just say that now I want to know, especially you being a CFO, how exactly those high turnover actually show up on the balance sheet. Like, is there a way to tell this number is from the fact that we're losing people all the time? And, I talk to a lot of people in HR or like people on culture, and they can make that attribution, but sometimes when it comes to C-suite, they can't. It's like they were like, what? We don't really know. But like, you as a CFO, is there a way to tell that this number is from high attribution?
Yes, there absolutely is. So, I mean, the most obvious way, I think, would be recruiting costs of bringing new people in after, there's turnover. That could be official recruiters. There's a ton of great ones in Kansas City. It could be internal recruiting, whether you have an official recruiting individual or team inside the company, or it could just be, some of our leaders this month didn't get near enough customers called, and they didn't get near enough initiatives pushed forward because they became the recruiters. A lot of companies don't want to pay a 25 or more percent, fee to a recruiter, but they're not looking at the fact that they have a high level leader who's not cheap, who's now spent, 40 plus hours 1 month to bring in someone to replace someone they lost. So I think those are kind of the most obvious ones. But then outside of that, I think revenue per FT is always a great measure. So that could be, hindered and lowered for a number of reasons, not related to turnover. But when you have turnover, that's where, because let's be honest, you get someone new in a role. Well, first of all, the person leaving might have quit. Maybe they didn't. I don't know. But they're not going to be productive on the way out the door. People coming in are now in a spot where they might be amazing, but depending on the role, it might be 3 to 6 months before they're really rocking and rolling. So now, in order to reach the overall revenue targets, it's all hands on deck from the rest of the team to kind of make up for that as they're growing. And that's where it's, in terms of personnel costs versus actual output and efficiency, that's where you kind of, it's a nuanced look. And that's why I think like myself as a CFO, like that's what I do. I'm like the matrix looking at financials where I can like see all the interconnections and stuff. But that's something that I don't think enough companies really realize and have the, like almost the chess mindset of you're seeing a couple numbers. Well, it might take 3 or 4 mental moves to kind of connect those dots, but they're there.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. And like this just opened up another question, which is I get all the time is what is the ROI of doing this mental health or wellness thing? Mm-hmm. You being a CFO, how would you answer that? Because that's something that I get a lot. And I think I'm doing a good job answering it, but I want to hear from someone who has the, like foresight of what's happening on like a numerical value, like where the company stands. Mm-hmm. How do you answer that question? What is the ROI of doing a mental health program, initiative, or wellness thing?
So for me, I'll kind of give 2 answers. And the first answer I think is the common answer. And that common answer is all the stuff that is truly meaningful, but it's more of just what's in the zeitgeist, the touchy-feely, like we want to treat people well. We want our employees to know that we're there for them. And if they're having a problem at home or if they're, just going through life, I mean, heck, like as we speak, there's a million different issues in the world going on that are devastating, heartbreaking and everything. So that's kind of the I think standard answer. Specifically tie it to the ROI. It's actually fairly straightforward and simple. So let's talk about turnover. So let's say your company has, 1,000 employees and turnover's crept up to 40%, on an annual basis. Well, like I just mentioned a minute ago, like every time there's a turnover, there is a gap where there might not be anybody in that role. Once you find somebody, it's months to, who knows how long to actually have them up and running. It's pretty easy to put a cost on that. And that's not even including things like recruiting fees. So, a recruiting fee, let's say, someone is a individual making $75,000 a year. Well, that recruiting fee on that's going to probably be, 15 to 20 plus grand.
Right.
ROI is all over that. Like, does it cost 15 to 20 plus grand a year to provide that position, that FTE mental health care? No, not even close. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing of like, what are we actually doing as business leaders? And I say that kind of frustratingly and like what are we doing?
Right.
Like, do we not understand simple math? Do we not understand how when you do the right things and treat people well, it actually also comes back in the terms of ROI? Like that's a pretty cool thing in the business world. And there's a million companies that, you can look at. If you look at the best places to work lists on any number of publications, whether it's KC Business Journal or otherwise, themes are there. It's not hard. You know, if you want to get a company on that, it's not as hard as you think. Right. In fact, they fully just bullet point, here's what we did. Mm-hmm. All right.
No, yeah. I actually read that, like lists a lot. Cause I that's the industry that I'm in. Mm-hmm. And I actually had a conversation with a very big healthcare CEO. And I asked him that specific question. And then he said, it cost them $10,000 per day per bed if they don't have a nurse available to cover. Mm-hmm. And this is a major hospital. Mm-hmm. And, they'll always, like losing, like nurses, which again, healthcare is very stressful. Mm-hmm. It's probably the hardest place to like retain people. Mm-hmm. But like how much, especially, from the perspective of a CFO, mm-hmm. how do you see culture and how does it play in the entire, like organization strategy, either that's a financial strategy or mm-hmm. just overall strategy? How much does culture play in the success of the company and making sure that people stay?
So culture is extremely important, obviously, goes without saying. I do think that there are different ways of promoting culture, and it might even be the exact same culture, but there's different ways that a leadership team can promote it within the company. I see it all too often where, I mean, heck, I just got done saying the best places to work list. They tell you, here's how we focus on culture and keeping our employees engaged and happy and all these things. Well, you can just do those things, but that's only half of it. The other half is, are you being genuine in promoting that within the company? Do people understand and emotionally and viscerally feel that you're being genuine? You know, because people can tell. I mean, how many times have you, whether it's been involved with a company or just heard whatever, where it's like, you know, they brought in a massage chair and everybody got 20-minute chair massages, and that was, you know, and the leadership's going, see how much we care about y'all,
right?
Yeah, and that type of stuff can be amazing, but that's where it's like, is it coming across in an actual genuine way where people feel like this is a cool thing, like this is done because we deserve to be supported as human beings, human beings first, and kind of employees and everything second? Is it being done because we have been working really hard, and whether we're killing it in the numbers or not, like we do need a lot of help just moving forward in today's environment as people, you know? And I think that's the biggest thing. So culture is, a lot of it is, what are you doing? But it's what level of attitude and emotional kind of output are you putting into those initiatives to really make people understand that it's not just lip service. Like, we actually care about everybody. You know, I've done a lot of work with employee-owned companies, and it's a big part of it, you know, because it's not just saying you're an owner. It's like, are we collectively actually caring about each other?
Right.
And that's where leadership is tough. I mean, you can do everything right, but if you're not emotionally invested, people can tell, you know? And I think that's the thing everybody misses when they talk about buzzwords. And I brought up LinkedIn earlier, which I think is amazing in so many ways. But one of the kind of side effects of that nowadays is you get all these snips, you know? I mean, you're going to do it with this and it's going to be amazing. And I think you've obviously really done it in a truly genuine way. But a lot of times you'll be scrolling through LinkedIn or any social media nowadays, and you'll see like a snip, and it'll be like some, you know, famous speaker, and they'll be going, oh, you know, I know more about my company than anybody in the business, you know, as a leader, whatever. And then someone will take that on, and then they'll go into their company and go, well, you know, this famous leader said that. Well, what they're failing to realize is that's a lot of times not even healthy. And that 30-second snippet that you saw, there's a whole book and podcast series behind it, all these things to actually do it right and move it forward. And that's where there's really that difference of, are you doing the right things, first of all, but then are you doing them in a genuine and meaningful way?
Right.
Yeah.
Is there like, you know, like an attention deficit when it comes to leadership? Because there's so much coming at like leaders, especially today, especially you talking about the LinkedIn and them trying to figure out how can they tie or like measure culture to performance. Is there too much coming at them, which is causing like an attention issue where they just want to get, you know, shit done and just move on?
Yeah. So I think 100%. And the biggest thing I'll say about that is, how many things are you doing? You know, like how many books are you reading? Like if you go into someone's office, and by the way, a lot of people I'm very close to and respect highly, and they're amazing leaders. You walk in their office and it's this way as well. So it's not necessarily a thing, but you walk into people's offices and they have a bookshelf with 100 leadership books on it. You know, like, what are you actually doing and focused on? You know, are you taking the first 5 chapters of this book over here, and then 3 chapters from this book over here and then 2 over here, which turns out contradicted this one, but you didn't really realize that. And so now you're like pushing and pulling. And I mean, that's where, when you talk about attention deficit in leadership, that's where it comes in my opinion, is just the so many things going on and so many things, flying past employees that, I mean, how are they supposed to focus on it? How are they supposed to dig in and then, 3 months later have something else, put on their desk that they're supposed to kind of read through and think through. So I think that's the biggest thing, is just, let's keep it simple, It's funny because I said a curse word earlier, but I'm not going to say the word, I'll say stupid, but it's that keep it simple thing.
The KISS strategy.
And that's for my kids. I try to get them not to say that word, but it's so true. And I think of that all the time in everything I do is, attention is tough. So let's make it worth it.
Right.
Like whatever we're getting people's attention on, let's make sure that it actually matters and it actually moves the needle forward, not just for the company, but for them. Because that's another thing that not enough people talk about, is if you actually create engaged people who are moving themselves forward in their careers and in their leadership capabilities and all that, like that's a win-win, So
I like that. And like another thing that I want to touch on, since we're talking about people, I talked to a lot of HR individuals. So some of them will have the title of Chief People Officer, but they find that, they'll find out that they're not even part of the leadership or like C-suite, level, but they have the title. Which is kind of like gaslighty, a position. Let's just give them a big title, but not actually assign them the strategic, decision making,
seat at the table,
a seat at the table. And I want to know from your perspective as someone in C-suite, how do they see HR individuals, or like, do they see them as like just people that keep people accountable, policy, and not like the leadership partner C-suite level that they can have to actually strengthen their decision making?
So I'm so glad you brought this up. I think that might be one of the single biggest correlating factors between companies that have cultures that matter and that actually drive, ROI overall, and companies that are struggling to either get footing or regain footing as they go through the life cycle of a business and all that. I just think it's a huge correlating factor. So there is no excuse in modern business to not have whatever your highest people and culture individual in a company is, they need to have a seat at the table. And I would argue that many companies need a chief people officer, but whatever that title is, that individual needs to be there. They need to understand what's going on. And I will say, like, everything in business, I understand why it happens, what people's mindsets got them there. In this scenario, I think, let's say you're talking about, should we close this branch or not? Well, on the surface, it's like, they might not bring in the chief people officer or highest people and culture individual, because they're going, well, we've got, the CFOs here. They're going to talk about, the savings on breaking the lease or selling the building or whatever it is. We've got, the revenue team here, and they're talking about, who's going to take over the revenue from this and this and this and make up for it or whatever. One thing that they've just never been trained to do is to talk about what's the impact on the actual culture of the business. What's the impact on the mental well-being of not just the individuals that might have to be let go in that scenario, but the ones who stay. Because the ones that are let go, honestly, they might be the lucky ones. They'll, if it's a decent company, get a severance package and be able to hopefully go do something that they enjoy or are in a lot of cases better at.
Right.
But what happens to the individuals that stay that now have to deal with that sense of loss, and that sense of grief for what the company just went through? And it's just not something that's usually talked about. I mean, going back to M&A, for example, and acquiring companies and integrating them, in my experience, and I'll kind of move it back to HR and not people and culture in this sense, because that's really how a lot of high-level leaders kind of still think of it, which I think is a mistake personally. But HR leaders were brought in literally just for logistics.
Yeah.
That was it. Hey, we have to go through, we just bought this company. We have to integrate everybody's PTO because they're on some weird system over here, and we're on an equally weird system, but a differently weird system. And we have to bring this and this together. We have to make sure that all these employees are onboarded successfully. Their PTO ties over. Their, all the policies are delivered in a way that they can kind of digest all these logistical things. That's generally when that area of a company is most used in those scenarios.
Right.
And that's where, honestly, I mean, the whole thing about what I'm doing in my career is moving into a consultative role, founding Iconoclast Advisors, co-founding it. And the whole goal is to change how all of these things are thought about moving through a company. Right. So, fractional CFO work, there's a shocking amount of that legitimately involves people and culture. There just is.
Right.
And maybe even more than operations or revenue or anything else. It's just inherently kind of intertwined. And so that's where I am always, just trying to push the ball forward of how do we make sure that people and culture has a seat at the table.
Right.
And not just a seat, but a significant,
meaningful seat.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like, you've like referenced the company that you've co-founded, Iconoclast. Mm-hmm. What exactly is Iconoclast? Mm-hmm. I just had a tongue twister trying to say.
It's a hard word. Yeah.
What does it mean? And like, what exactly is the company about? You mentioned fractional CFO. Yeah. But I know it's more than that as well.
It's a lot more than that. And so it's actually funny. It's similar to what we were just talking about with people and culture not always being understood and being given a seat at the table, not even necessarily maliciously. A lot of people haven't experienced it in their careers or lives where they think it's necessary. And so that's something where, first of all, the word iconoclast is just, how do we come into something completely fresh and different and unique, And by the way, not unique just for unique's sake, because I think that's a huge mistake when people make it. Unique because a lot of things aren't working, So many business challenges nowadays, they involve, even going outside the company, whether it's civil unrest or just geopolitics around the world. People are carrying this. And so kind of being an iconoclastic thinker and naming the company that is all about helping companies understand how everything is interrelated, how the holistic business needs to really kind of, all the gears need to be moving together. Everybody needs to be moving in that same direction towards culture and towards, future growth and all that. So that's kind of the role. And then in terms of the fractional CFO work, that is what I personally am probably most closely known for. But I'm trying to, I've been, it's been a few months now. I've been trying to kind of go back and forth in my head. I think I'm settling on something like fractional CFO plus for myself in particular. And the reason is people have to know where to put you in their head. Right. But I also want to make it very clear which is why, once again, the company's named Iconoclast. Is I want to make it very clear that we're not coming in just to do things the way they've always been done. And there's a time and place for it. And I've got some great leads that I've had to refer elsewhere because it is truly, they need a blocking and tackling individual.
Right.
That's not me and not us. So that's where if a business is looking to move itself forward in a way that actually drives results and doesn't just cut close down from 9 days to 5 days financially, if they're looking to actually move the entire business forward, like that's kind of what the iconoclastic thinking comes in to do.
Right. Okay. Wow. Well, we are getting to the end of this, and I have kind of like a closing question that I ask people.
Let's do it.
And again, I can talk to you for like hours because I actually have a finance background. So that's why I'm asking all these questions. But like, if you were to go into company as, now the co-founder of Iconoclast, what would be a metric that you would share with every C-suite leader? What is one thing that, I'm sure there's a laundry list of, like metrics that they should pay attention to. I know finance, but I want you to share one that doesn't include finance. What's the metric that they should know as they operate and manage and like delegate work?
So I mean, some of this is going to depend on where a company is in its life cycle, but I think that the reason I'm hesitating isn't because I don't want to say it, it's because I'm trying to figure out how to say it that doesn't make the business community think I'm insane.
Right. One metric, like the one, like snippet that you shared.
Yeah. So in my opinion, and like I said, every company I've ever been with, they've kind of looked at me weird. Once it actually gets put into place, it generally comes to fruition pretty well. But the metric for me is, where are we in terms of what our average compensation is versus companies in same industry, within the city, within the region, whatever it is.
Right.
And the reason people look at me like I'm insane is I want to be top 10%. I want to be among the highest paid companies. And I believe that if you are consistently at that level, and by the way, not erroneously, not throwing money around, but if you're paying people very well for what they do and making sure that they feel appreciated, and if the company's winning, they feel like they're winning. If you can get to that level genuinely, I think that is one of the biggest drivers of positive company culture, of financial success. I would put that up against anybody. And generally, you're going to have even a higher revenue per FTE, believe it or not, even though you're paying higher, because you're not having 3 individuals for one role.
Right.
You're having 1 or 2 high-level individuals who care about what they do every day, and they're driving it forward, and they're not just moving cogs around. They're thinking, how can we do this better?
Right.
How can we make SOWs along the way so that these other people can do it better? And by the way, we're doing that because, they're thinking like, I'm not going to be in this role in 18 months. I'm going to be here, up the org chart. So when you can create that in people and actually kind of develop that mindset within the company to where people actually do want to move forward with the company and move forward and kind of, just help better themselves and those coming along to kind of backfill where they leave as they move forward. I mean, that's where it's really impactful.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And so we have a closing tradition here that I always ask my guests, which is, but after everything that we've talked about, I know there's a lot going on in the world, but how is your spirit and how do you feel just right now?
Oh man. How is my spirit? So I will say that, first of all, we need to do 8 more pods to fully get into my spirit, because that's talking about spirit and just internal development is one of my favorite things, even maybe more than business. But I think that my spirit is, there's a dichotomy in my spirit. There is where the world is when I talk to people, and most of the people I talk to are really care, they really care about moving things forward in a genuine way in the world and cutting through the noise and all that. And then there's the other side of that coin, which is we've never been more divided, even in the business world. I mean, part of why I wanted to start Iconoclast Advisors was because I want to be able to drive things forward in a meaningful way and not constantly have to, sell all these different directions that in my opinion, we should be going,
Right.
The divisiveness in this world has just never been, higher. And that's what breaks my heart, because I think in many cases it's a manufactured divisiveness. We are told that we're supposed to feel a certain way, so we do.
Right.
And if you actually talk to most people, they're genuinely concerned about the future of not just the world or the country, but, themselves, their family, their kids, whatever. And so I'll say, in a weird way, after saying all that, I'm actually hopeful. I'm hopeful that something can come along and make us all realize that we're a heck of a lot more alike than we are different.
Right.
And I think it just comes from dialogue, because that's another thing. Like, dialogue is not promoted these days. It's just not, like if you find out someone thinks differently than you, it's actually, at this point, probably promoted not to sit down with that person.
Yeah.
And so that's, like I'm saying, I think my spirit is actually, it's in pain in one sense, but it's also very hopeful.
Wow, that's powerful. Because, it takes a lot to be hopeful right now, especially what's happening today. With everything going
today.
on.
Yeah.
So wow, that's very powerful. Normally I ask these questions to set up for another episode. So I would definitely love to have you, to just keep talking about that, that perspective as well. But again, thank you so much for coming in today. I genuinely look forward to people hearing your thoughts of someone in C-suite and also now getting out of C-suite and now working with companies to help them better see their people, because everyone wants to be seen, man. That's one of the biggest things that I get when I do my service. Is usually money is number one, and then being seen, heard, and also being respected. So thanks for coming in. This is very very good. So thank you.
It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me. And I look forward to getting into whatever weird stuff you want to get into next time.
I have a laundry list.
There's no end for me. We didn't even get into a lot of it. So we're over an hour, so that's why I had to. Are we really?
Yeah, I know. It's crazy how time flies, right?
Yeah.
I know. All right, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.